Today we've got questions on Charles's favorite prime minister of Britain, the Holy Roman Empire, and Charles answers whether the Habsburgs are interested in regaining their authority. Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu, now being broadcast and podcast on the Crusade Channel. Talk radio the way it should be on crusadechannel.com. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with a schmaltzy Charles Coulombe.
Schmaltzy? Schmaltzy? You mean like it was back in the old neighborhood? You know, when nobody had to lock their doors, you know, and we didn't, none of us knew we were poor. I mean, everybody loved everybody. We had Greeks and Irish, Jews. And, I mean, some people went to Our Lady of Health, other people went to PS7, but you know, we play in the streets. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody's ma was everybody's ma. You know what I mean? I mean, you get called in. One of the mothers on the block would say, "Hey, boys, come in and have a bite," and you know, it was wonderful. The old neighborhood, you know, honestly, it just isn't like that anymore. You know what I'm saying? It was wonderful. But you know, I mean, it was the depression. People had to pull together to get by. You had 6 or 7 different generations living in one apartment, and it was really wonderful. It was
Wow,
just
that's incredible, Charles. That's amazing.
it was really something I could tell you. I remember great grandma. We used to say it was different in the old country. She couldn't quite remember which old country, but yeah. Are you feeling schmaltz?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think though really the phrase the old neighborhood is got to be the launching pad of more schmaltzy stories than anything else I know. You know, the idea is, I guess the old neighborhood is roughly from about World War One to 1949 when everyone starts moving out to the suburbs. Uh, but I really, all kidding aside, I mean, if I've heard one story like that, I've heard 1,000. Usually it has 7 or 8 generations living in one room. It was, to be honest, it was more like 3. But people lived a long time back then. I can't play stickball anymore. I gotta go in and see great grandma. Oh man. Hey. But no, it was definitely that was definitely a staple of northeastern urban schmaltz was the whole stories of the old neighborhood and everything was wonderful and so on. But you know, then the war came, people left. When they came back, they wanted bigger houses, they wanted TV sets, they wanted to move out, you know, to the suburbs. And that's what happened. You know, and then of course, I mean, it's all changed now. It's all different. I mean, you don't have any of the same people living there anymore. The O'Neills, the Glicks, the Lifshitzes, they're all gone. You know, I don't know who these people are living there now. I mean, they're Puerto Ricans, they're Dominicans, they're Franciscans, they're Jesuits. I don't know what they are, but that's who's living there now, and it's very different. I mean, you get robbed today. You don't dare walk down the street in the old neighborhood after 3 p.m. It's really It's all changed.
I love the schmaltz. My grandmother, who again like born 1913 ish,
Yeah.
I loved her stories for that because I bought into it and it sounded like a totally different world. I mean, things like, Uncle Johnny was good with his hands, he was an electrician, so he's just helping a whole neighborhood and you just need anything, you call Uncle Johnny. And then Uncle Polly, did this. It just give you this picture of this very intimate, interconnected neighborhood, almost a utopia, you know?
Well, that's how it often seemed in the. It's how it often seemed in retrospect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, of course, at the time, I mean, if it had been that wonderful, people wouldn't have wanted to move out. Well, I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
But it's like the PBS's thing about the Irish in America, and they're coming over from Ireland. They got what they wanted, they lost what they had. And I think that's true not just of immigrants to America, but I think it's also true of the immigrants from the innumerable old neighborhoods out to the suburbs.
Yeah.
Because they got what they wanted and they lost what they had. You want your TV antenna on the roof, your 2-car garage, all the kids going to college instead of learning trades. Well, okay, you got all that. And that was really the story of the 50s and 60s. And the late 40s was people leaving the old neighborhood and moving on, as it were. I mean, I can remember, for instance, when we came out to L.A. Hollywood, of course, was quite urban, but there was still a lot of middle class families living there back in those days. And we moved out to the San Fernando Valley. It's very different. And oddly enough, the neighborhood that we were living in Lakeview Terrace, we got there in 68, 69, 68. We left in 72, and by then it completely changed. It was a very dull, white bread kind of place when we got there, and it was all black by the time we left. And then the blacks themselves would be only dominant for a few years, and it became Mexican. So it's interesting to see the way these urban waves, you know.
Yeah.
And you can in the older cities, you can often see it in the churches where a now primarily Hispanic or Filipino or both congregation is in a place with a name like St. Patrick's or St. Wenceslas or Our Lady of the Rosary. And the Italians or the Irish or the Czechs or whatever they were that were there before are long, long gone.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, what can you do?
Well, it's a funny thing you should ask. What can you do? That was really, I asked Ma Goldstein next door, how can we keep people from leaving the neighborhood and moving out to the burbs? I asked her that, and she said, darling, people have got to do what people have got to do. It's just that way. She said, my kids want us to move out to the suburbs. They've offered me free rent. What am I supposed to say? No. I said, but Ma Goldstein, you're the soul of this neighborhood. You're the one we all come to. And she says, fine, come see me in Hackensack.
In Jersey?
Yeah. Yeah, they moved out to Jersey.
Sad.
Well, things were never the same after the Goldsteins moved out to Hackensack, I can tell you. And then the Laffertys, they moved out to Forest Hills. The Patroclides, they were Greeks, they moved out to Astoria. And everybody moved on. It's just not what it was. It was so different. Yeah. And I remember when we used to run the numbers. Oh, wait a minute.
Wait, yeah, what?
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to run. That was, well, yeah. Anyhow,
Yeah. Okay. All right,
I
moving
remember
on.
playing blackjack on the corner. It was something, pitching pennies. Pickpocketing was big because, if somebody came from outside our neighborhood, let me tell you, the pocket was open season. Suddenly the old neighborhood turns really dark. Sure, I remember the old neighborhood. Didn't I used to walk my beat there? Let me tell you something. I know how to keep them lads in line. Everybody smiles. But it is true that, you know, all joking aside, these places, they as you saw with your grandmother, they achieved a sort of mythic locale in the mind certainly of the Northeast. And now, I grew up on my dad's side with stories of the French Canadian ghettos in New England, and they were the little Canadas, and they were. Uh, it's the same kind of story. You've got an industry that attracts everyone there, and then the industry goes, and the places just rot. And then eventually, the people who have any drive leave, and those who don't just sort of hang on.
Yeah. All right, we've got a question from Hoosier Jacobite.
Okay, let's hear it.
So I guess he's from Indiana.
Yeah,
So he says, "Bonjour, Mr. Coulombe, and that Italian guy
that's you.
from the banks of the Wabash, far away.
Wabash.
Wabash, far away. Once New
Yes.
France, home of fur traders and Indians, later the grave robbing capital of early 20th century America, and home to 6 U.S. vice presidents. Erich von Kuhnelt-Ledeen classifies Nazism, fascism, and indeed nationalism in general as left-wing movements. This, of course, is completely the opposite of modern thought, which considers nationalism as not only right-wing, but far-right. And not only the left, for many of whom right-wing seems to imply racist, but also on the so-called right among mainstream conservatives and the supposed alt-right. Indeed, I well remember one white nationalist blogger admitting that the only thing he disagreed with Hillary Clinton on was race, which apparently was enough for him to consider himself and be considered by others to be on the far right. So what does Charles think? Was Kuhnelt-Ledeen correct? Is that how right and left would have been classified prior to this time? To his time? And if so, why has the mainstream view reversed to what it is now?
Well, firstly, let me just say, oh, the moonlight's fair tonight along the Wabash. From the fields there comes the breath of new mown hay. Through the sycamore the candle lights are gleaming on the banks of the Wabash, far away. Just thought
Beautiful.
that's kind of a schmaltzy song.
Definitely.
The banks of the Wabash. It's also the state song of Indiana.
Nice.
Anyway, well, I would agree with Eric von Ledeen. Now, I know that sounds sort of strange and bizarre until you remember a few things. One is that fascism, of course, was fathered by Benito Mussolini. And Benito Mussolini was a socialist. In fact, he was a hereditary socialist. He was named Benito after Benito Juarez. Benedetto is the Italian for Benedict. Benito is Spanish. So he was raised by an anti-clerical socialist father. He broke with the Socialist Party because of his nationalism. He wanted to get into World War I. They didn't. Hitler, again, I shouldn't have to belabor the fact he made a big deal about being a National Socialist. And that basically his was a socialism for his particular nation, Germany. Now, what does all this have to do with each other, with communism? Well, several things. Basically, Nazism, brown-shirted Bolshevism, fascism, communism, much of what we call liberalism today, are all aspects of that thing they call modernity, which arguably began to emerge with the Protestant revolt and the demand for the sovereign self-judgment, the right of the individual to decide for himself what the Bible means. That was the first revolution against the altar. Then starting, well, really in England in the 1640s, but really roaring into life in France and America in the 18th century, comes the rebellion against the throne. And there were all sorts of different isms that came up dedicated to destroying one or another element of traditional life. And of course, as each wave of revolution became successful, there was less of said traditional life to be attacked. Now we come down to a place where altar and throne having been overthrown and everything having been very centralized, as our adventures during COVID showed us, we're left with a rebellion, with a revolution against reality itself. So we're not male, we're not female, we're not this, we're not that. The sovereign individual who has complete choice of everything in his life, subject to however his master wants to use him. So you could be a male or female, but you'll do whatever you like as your boss tells you to. So that is the end state of modernity, at least so far. And certainly fascism, communism, Nazism were all, by that standard, philosophies of the left. Philosophies of the right resist some or all of those various agendae.
Right. All right, Jared says, hello, I have a couple questions for Charles. What does Charles think of the stories of American author L. Frank Baum?
Well, who doesn't love The Wizard of Oz? I mean, I'd be tender, I'd be gentle. I'd be awfully sentimental if I only had a heart. And with the thoughts I'd be thinking, I could be another Lincoln if I only had a brain. What's not to love?
Okay. So he wrote a lot of children's stories?
He did. Now, mind you, he was something of a social and political radical, and he was a theosophist. So people like to find all kinds of religious and political code work in his stories.
What is theosophy?
Theosophy is a sort of westernized Hinduism cooked up by a lady named Helena Blavatsky, who was a Russian lady in the 19th century. She started in the 1870s, the Theosophical Society in New York. They have branches all around the world, and it is very much well, as I say, it's a Western Hinduism. You're not. They claim you don't have to adhere to reincarnation and this and that, to be a member, but that's very much what they teach. And it played a big role actually in the formation of Indian identity. I don't mean American Indian, I mean Turban. In fact, Madame Blavatsky's successor as the head of the TS, Annie Besant, was one of the co-founders of the Congress Party of India. So, and they also, believe it or not, started Sunday schools for Buddhists in Ceylon, Sri Lanka. So a lot of the westernizing reform movements in India, Pakistan, Ceylon, etc., actually came out of theosophy, oddly enough.
All right. Jared also asks, why do Protestants add, quote, "For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory," to the end of the Lord's Prayer? Great question.
Well, the reason for that is that as you may or may not know, at the time of the Protestant revolt, the Latin Vulgate was the standard Catholic Bible, and there were vernacular translations, but they were from the Vulgate. When King James wanted to come up with his version of the Bible that was not the Vulgate, he used various Greek and Hebrew manuscripts that weren't the Vulgate, and had his translators translate New English from Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. But as it happened, one of the manuscripts that he used had a sort of pious acclamation by the Greek monk who had copied it from the liturgy, "For thine is the kingdom, the power," etc. The Greek monk wrote that in. The Anglican translators decided that the church had suppressed it, and so they put it in, and it has stayed there ever since, from the King James Bible. So,
Wow. All right. Will says, who is Charles's favorite prime minister of Britain and why?
that's a very difficult question. But if I had to give an answer, I would say probably Benjamin Disraeli.
What is that? So that's turn of the century.
Well, 19th century.
19th
He
century.
died in 1881, I think.
Oh, okay.
Lord Beaconsfield. He was the founder of the Conservative Party. He did some things I really don't like, but he was a very what's the word, visionary sort of individual. He was a member of Young England, which I do definitely like when he was young. He was the fellow who cooked up the idea of the Empress of India. He invented the title. He had, as they say, he was a converted Jew, or rather his father had converted, but he'd already been born, so he was baptized as a child when his father became Christian. And as they used to say, he had an Oriental imagination. I would say that as a quick second to him would be Lord Salisbury, who was the Tory Prime Minister actually after Disraeli until 1904. Partly because he was the last peer to serve as Prime Minister, but also because of his sponsorship of George Wyndham as First Secretary for Ireland.
Okay. That's interesting. It's an interesting compare and contrast a little bit with your favorite presidents. And obviously, on your list of favorite presidents, Washington's right at the top. And if I remember your reasoning correctly, you say he was the closest to, that other world of kingship and stuff like that. So that does not seem to come into play here.
No, here it's a whole other kind of playing field. It's chess and checkers.
Okay. How is that?
Well, I mean, in the sense of one's favorite British Prime Minister, um, I mean, Churchill, I guess, would be kind of a third uh, for me, and
That's
then
surprising. I thought you didn't like Churchill at all.
he did a lot I disliked, but he did some things I liked. And to be honest with you, he's a mixed bag. Remember that we were talking about a bunch of people who, by and large, I don't like most British prime ministers. So, you know,
Oh, okay. Okay? How do British prime ministers in general stack up to the presidents of the United States?
better, but
Saying much.
that's not saying much.
Okay.
I mean, you got the same problem with both in the sense that um, both of them are party leaders. It's very rare, very difficult for a politician to rise above party. It's very, very hard. Um, and when they did, I mean, the reason why I like Lord Salisbury, for instance, was especially dealing with Ireland, is as they called it, killing home rule with kindness. That is the idea being to give Ireland the best kind of government it could possibly have, uh, in order to get rid of any desire for independence. The idea being that if you're better run from London than you could possibly be run from Dublin, why would you be run from Dublin? But that requires a lot of work, and he was willing to try. But that was also against the purely. It was a higher goal than party. It was a higher goal than whereas his opponents at the time in the Liberal Party, they pushed for home rule purely to get a majority in Parliament. It's a little bit like the Spanish Prime Minister today, who's willing to pardon the treasonous Catalan leaders so long as they'll vote to keep him in power.
Hmm.
That's pure party. That's just, I'll sell my soul to the devil as long as I can sit on top of the trash heap.
Hmm.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. I don't want any politician to think that I would dream of censuring their behavior as they go to hell.
All right. Um, taking this back a little bit to your prime ministers, for some reason I'm thinking I feel like I have read enough of your writings to say that there's I feel like you've said favorable things about Lord Frederick North.
Oh, well, yes,
Yeah,
that
right.
just hit me. Yeah, all right, Lord North would be my favorite.
I knew there was something there.
Lord North.
Something fell off to me.
Yeah,
So,
you're right. Lord North's my favorite British prime
okay.
minister, without a doubt. Guy knew his place. Definitely Lord North. He did as he was told. But again, he saw himself as the king's first minister,
Right.
not as the head of the government.
Okay.
If you see the difference.
Yeah.
You see, what always makes me giggle about the word minister is that it means servant.
Yeah.
But if you know anything about governments today, especially, you'll be hard put to find a cabinet minister in any country who considers himself the servant of anybody, God, king, or people.
Yeah. So could
He's
you
just about me.
could you explain to everybody why you like Lord North so much?
Well, sure. I don't mind explaining.
Yeah.
Lord North, basically, when George III became king, Britain was very deeply under the claws of the Whig oligarchy that had actually begun in origin with the people who were given the monastic lands by Henry VIII. They became a real force in the period before the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, the so-called English Civil Wars. They murdered the king in 1649. And then, because things were in such bad shape, they were forced to tolerate the Restoration in 1660, but then engineered the overthrow of King James in 1688. And they fended off each of the Jacobite rebellions to remain firmly in power at the time that George III became king. Now, they had actually tightened power a bit because James II's daughter and the last Stuart to actually occupy the throne, Queen Anne, she had retained, although Parliament was sovereign as a result of 1688, she still retained a great deal of influence, especially as regarded choosing her prime minister. And she presided over cabinet meetings and was definitely a part of government. Not the final say, not the end all and be all, but a big part. Well, when she died and was replaced by George I, who spoke no English, the prime minister ended up usurping everything because the king spoke no English and really didn't care about England. And that was the case through two generations. But then George III comes along. He's born in Britain. His first language is English. And as he said himself on his inaugural speech, I am the first of my family to glory in the name of Britain. And he did. So his idea was to restore not 1688, but 1708. That is to say, the way things have been under Queen Anne. Obviously, this launched him into conflict with the Whig oligarchy. And he initially appointed a prime minister, the Marquis of Bute, or the Earl of Bute, who he wanted, but Bute was forced out, and he was forced to endure the slings and arrows of outrageous faction as the different Whig factions mismanaged the country ever further. But slowly but surely, the king worked. He gathered friends in Parliament. And that was actually the beginning of the modern Tory party, the king's friends. And by 1774, there were enough of these folk in Parliament that he was able to select a prime minister he wanted. And that prime minister was Frederick Lord North. Lord North was, he cooperated with his king in terms of governing the country. Unfortunately, they had the opposition not only of the Whig oligarchy at home, but of 13 little Whig oligarchiettes across the water in America. And one of the things that they inherited from the other governments was the desire to get those colonies not to pay their fair share of the expenses being put out on them, because nobody expected that, but a symbolic amount in order to assure the great British taxpayer, who was actually paying for everything, that the colonials weren't completely freeloaders.
Right.
That didn't work very well. Interestingly enough, though, the oligarchies of the colonies shrieked no taxation without representation, because the things that were being taxed were primarily things that only the wealthy people used anyway. But the irony was that they themselves dominated the colonial assemblies, which levied most of the taxes that most people paid and that most people couldn't vote for. So, in other words, no taxation without representation means Parliament, not the local assembly that I dominate. Because, see, I'm in charge here, and here it's okay. But when I'm the one who's not being represented, then there's a problem.
That makes sense. That's very on brand.
Yeah, I should think so. And so the end result, of course, was our first Civil War, the American Revolution, so-called. But at any rate, so yeah, Lord North gets, I'll take him as my favorite.
All right, there you go. All right. Bunch of questions from Andrew from New Jersey. Good old Andrew.
You tell Andrew from me three things. One, it may be Tappan, New York, but it's the Tappan Zee Bridge, smart guy. Secondly, the Jersey Devil is not necessarily a demonic force. He could be a cryptid like Bigfoot. And thirdly, Italian Hoboken still lives on in the spirit of those who lived in the old neighborhood.
Someone in our patron chat, I think it was Connor. He had a really interesting a map of New Jersey. It was like the top 10 Italian restaurants in New Jersey, and it plotted them on the New Jersey map. And wouldn't you know it, it was all Olive Gardens. Across
the olive. The Olive Garden in West Orange. Why not? Why not the Olive Garden? Have you ever been to the Olive Garden in Arcadia?
I have not, actually. I have not.
You know, your brother wouldn't go either. There's just like this. Every Italian I know in the San Gabriel Valley refuses to go to the Olive Garden. Well, I want you to know that they have bottomless pasta. I've been to the Olive Garden.
Andrew from New Jersey didn't respond to that. I don't think he cared for that one.
No, I'm sure. I'm sure that would definitely, Andrew from New Jersey would definitely not appreciate that. But let's just, out of curiosity, let's just put this out there. Let's find out what our friends say. Best Italian restaurant in New Jersey.
Oh no. It'd probably be something legit.
Well, there's 21. There's several that are tossed up here as possibilities. Borelli's Restaurant and Bar in Secaucus, New Jersey. Luca's Ristorante in Somerset, New Jersey. Laco's in Jersey City. God, they still got one. Now, Il Nido in Marlborough. Huh. The Cafe Luna of Old Bridge, known as Chiti Cucina in Englishtown. Ha. Salute in Manawan. Ha. Well, I must say, they've Angelina's Ristorante on Staten Island. Well, that's not New Jersey. But Jimmy's Italian Restaurant in Asbury Park. Gosh, and no two of these lists are the same.
Yeah. I guess it's people who moved out of the old neighborhood and just set up shop in New Jersey.
Yeah, yeah, unless the old neighborhood was in Jersey City or Hoboken. Sapori Trattoria in Collingwood, La Fiamma in Harrison, Chef Vola's in Atlantic City. Now that one I've been to. Chef Vola's since 1921, reservations only.
Wow.
Boy, I went there back in 1981. Boy, they were 60 years they've been open then. Now they've been open over 100. Isn't that something?
All right.
It does take you back. What would you say is the best Italian restaurant within a 5-mile radius of your house?
I really like this Grano Italian Ristorante. I really do. What I love about it is they have, you can mix and match your sauce with the pasta cut. And they've had bolognese sauce, which I love, really love their bolognese. The Genovese sauce is really good. It's just so good. It's so good.
What is this place called?
Grano Italian Restaurante. It's off Huntington. It's in Duarte.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
And the
So it's
owners,
beyond
the owners came
Dominican.
from Italy. They fly in. They're telling me, I talked to them personally because the owners, they sit down and they talk to everyone individually on a good night. And so I know the owner. They fly the tomatoes in from Italy. They're, they say it's richer because the minerals in the soil and all this and that. So,
well, let's see. Grano Restaurant. They're on Huntington.
yeah.
Download our menu. Huh. Boy, I've got. They'll only email it to me.
No, really.
They'll only email me the menu. Can you imagine?
Huh.
They're very hardcore.
Yeah. I don't
Let me
mess
see.
around, Charles.
I guess not. Let me see where to go. Now they haven't sent it to me, so they don't care.
Oh. Anyhow, I don't know. Anyhow, are we done with
All
this
right.
part? I know we could talk forever about Italian cuisine, but because it's that
We
good.
could.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyhow, Andrew from New Jersey, here we
I know,
go.
I-
You ready?
Yeah.
All right. All right. His first question, he says, first, devotions to Saint Joseph have been very popular as of late. And indeed, my family claims him as our own patron saint. The church even gives him his own level of veneration called protodulia, which suggests we should honor Saint Joseph first before all saints. Yet also in the Bible, our Lord says of Saint John the Baptist, truly I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. That's from Matthew 11:11. So Charles, in the hierarchy of heaven, who is greater, Saint Joseph or Saint John the Baptist?
Oh, that's a hard question. That's a really hard question. Well, I would suppose I'd have to go for Saint Joseph because he was, after all, our Lord's stepfather and had the caring of him, which is hard to top. But it could well be that that's an issue that you'll have to wait until you're on the other side to find the answer to.
Wow. Okay, that was a good objective answer because it just occurred to me at the end of that there's sort of a cultural divide there of sorts. Potentially.
Well, yeah,
I
know. Saint Jean Baptiste being the French Canadian patron and Saint Joseph being the Italian patron. Yes, believe me. But see, I'm not one of those petty minded little nationalist types who's going to hold it would never even have occurred to me to think of it in those terms.
Okay, good.
Because see, I'm above that. All right. I'm not like some of these people who would be, oh well, you're just saying that because you're Italian. Well, I'm not Italian. Well, all right, a little bit.
Yeah, what happened? Oh, you're disavowing now? Whoa.
No, I'm not
you're
disavowing
flip-flopping.
it.
Oh, I'm not Italian.
Well, not mostly. Got a lot more other stuff. I have a few drops of Italian blood, which I'm proud of. I'm proud of Italy. I mean, think of Italy. Don't think of Italy as what you see now. Think of Italy as she was before 1935 when she, lined up with Hitler. Think of Italy as the guarantor of Austrian independence. Think of all the building that was going on. The aqueducts through the desert in Libya, the rebuilding of the Grand Master's palace in Rhodes, the draining of the Pontine marshes. Think of the New Italy.
Hmm. I don't
You know, with
know.
the fascist realism architecture.
I, you're a fair weather Italian.
You
You're
think so?
Italian when it suits you, but when there's little trouble. Oh, I'm not Italian. I disavow.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'd go to Olive Market. You wouldn't.
Olive Market.
Olive
Olive
Garden,
Garden.
whatever it is. Whatever. I'd go to Olive Garden. You wouldn't.
What does that mean?
It means I'll eat the endless pasta, and you won't.
Well, I mean, if that's not your basic, okay.
What?
You're trying to trigger me. You're trying to trigger me. I'm not gonna fall for it. All right.
What? Trigger you?
All right.
Trigger you? Do you hear what? Yeah,
Oh yeah,
that accusation hurts.
yeah. Now that looked at on Charles's face and his reaction, that's what happens when he smells blood in the water. He gets really excited.
No, I'm pained. He smells blood in the water. That's very upsetting. I feel terrible that you would have said that to me. Squirt, squirt. All right, one last Italian restaurant question then we're done with it.
All right.
Mama Petrillo's.
So there are actually several Petrillos in the area. One is called Mama Petrillo's, which I haven't been to. I've been to Petrillo's.
All right, so Petrillo's. Petrillo's on Duarte.
No. Wait. What are you doing? Petrillo's is on Valley.
Oh, it's on. Yes, of course, you're right. My mistake. Petrillo's Valley Boulevard. Petrillo's Pizza, San Gabriel, the original Petrillo's Pizza, not some phonied up, gussied up.
My wife and I, for the first time we had their pasta this year, and I didn't like it at all. I did not like it at all. No, I love best pizza in the area, but outside of the pizza, don't care for it. Yeah.
Well, let me see. Dinner. I'm looking at the dinner menu at Petrillo's. Did you have pasta?
Yeah, I think I had linguine with con vongole. I think that was linguine with clams. I didn't like it.
That was probably your mistake.
Why?
You should have had a meat dish.
Could be.
Although, frankly, I haven't eaten there in, I don't know, years. Were they any relation to Mama Petrillo's? I've been there too.
That's a great question. I wonder about that. I don't know.
No, here your Italian clams casino with white bacon and white lime sauce, broccoli, eggplant, ensalada, pasta, bolognese. I'm afraid Domenico's is the one that I've gone to most regularly in recent years.
I don't like Domenico's. I really don't like Domenico's. I do not. And we're okay. So respectfully disagree. That's great that you like it, but yeah. Okay.
I like the rigatoni with meat sauce
do you?
and meatballs and sausage.
Okay, maybe I'll try that next time if I'm ever there. And yeah. All right. Did the Holy Roman Empire ever have any colonies in Africa, Asia, or the Americas? And if not, why not?
It's a very good question, and the answer is yes and no. Ha 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 ha. What do I mean by that? Well, as the Holy Roman Empire, no, because it simply was not sufficiently united, if you will. But the Habsburgs did have two different trading companies that had towns in India for relatively brief periods. The Ostend East India Company and the Trieste India Company. And these did a good deal of trading with India more than anywhere else. But they simply did not have the resources or the interest, frankly, in in colonizing the New World. Now, oddly enough, Prussia in the 1600s had a couple of colonies on the west coast of Africa. Prussia was part of the empire, of course, but it was totally doing its own thing. The Order of Malta, which in a sense was linked to the empire, ruled several West Indian islands, including St. Croix, in the 1600s. But none of this lasted long. Because again, there was a a rush of companies to get out there, trading companies, Danish, Swedish, Prussian. Courland had a post in Africa and one of the Indian islands, one of the West Indian islands. But none of these places had the means to sustain the effort, so they didn't last very long. And then in the case of both the Ostend and the Trieste companies, if I remember correctly, winding them up was part of the price of peace with France on two different occasions. So the Ostend company it started in 1722 from Ostend, which is now in Belgium, and that lasted for a few years. It says provided a strong competition for the more established British, Dutch, and French East India companies, notably in the lucrative trade with China, the tea trade. And then in 1775, there was the Austrian East India Company at Trieste, which started in 1775 and only lasted 10 years. It had a colony in Delagoa Bay, which is in Mozambique, and was snuffed out by the Portuguese. They had a post in India, which Banki Bazar on the Hooghly River, which was still in Austrian hands in 1794, but Britain took it over shortly thereafter. The Nicobar Islands, before Denmark took them, was briefly Austrian, but none of these things lasted very long. The opportunity had missed. So, yeah, it's a sad story, really. They were busy doing other things at other times. The Ostend Company was wound up in 1737. And then the Trieste Company, 1775 to 1785. And they held on to their last Indian possession until 1794. But it just was not a big deal, sadly. Bankapur is still with us. It's the town in Bengal that they settled. It's now part of Barakpur. So that was the end of that. Austria just did not. Now, Austria would also, however, in 1898, 1900, you may remember they had the Boxer Rebellion. And Austria was one of the 8 powers that intervened to put it down. And as a result, when they divided the city of Tientsin into foreign concessions, Austria got one of her own alongside Belgium and Italy, and France and Germany and Britain and so on. But the Austrian concession in Tientsin was seized in World War I in 1914. So that was the last real effort that Austria made in the colonial realm.
All right. Final question for today. The question we've all been waiting for, at least I have. From Andrew. He says, I know I speak for many when I say that it was Charles who got me interested in learning more about the Habsburg dynasty. Um, and turned me into a Habsburg supporter. Many who watch this show favor a Habsburg restoration. But my question is, do the Habsburgs favor Habsburg restoration? I ask this because I read not long ago an interview with one of the Habsburgs in the line of succession, and he did not seem very interested at all in reclaiming his birthright as king of Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, Jerusalem, etc., etc. As someone who has met many members of the Habsburg family, how do they view themselves in relation to the world? Are they interested in regaining their authority? Would they take the crown if offered to them? Are they interested in remaining as a kind of symbol for tradition? Or is it something else?
Well, mind you, I can't really speak for them because I am in no way any kind of a spokesman for any of the Habsburgs. Um, but I would say that they're number one. I would say that they all believe that the dynasty represents certain values, religious and political, and in a certain sense must act as witnesses to those particular values. Now, of course, the problem with those values is that they are rejected by everybody running the show in the world today, and probably the vast majority of people. Most people like the slop they have to a greater or lesser degree. And of course, before the Habsburgs, is always the example of what happened to Blessed Emperor Karl, who was utterly shredded. Um, so it's very, very difficult. The do you put yourself up as a leader in order to get shot down by a very ungrateful bunch of people anyway, who have what they want, who are eating the sewage that they so crave so badly? Why would you want to pull people away from the sewage they're eating? I mean, it's one thing to demand that one of them play Aragorn, but even Aragorn had rangers. I mean, there's a lot of pro-Habsburg sentiment, but sentiment is not the same thing as a commitment to a cause. And the vast majority, I mean, mutatis mutandis, it's like with the pro-life cause. You know, here we finally get the opportunity in America with Roe v. Wade being knocked down, and the true nature of things is seen. The majority of people in America, and I'm sure it's true in Europe, want abortion. Who would want to rule such people? Now, I mean, whenever you mention Habsburg on Twitter, you're inundated with pictures of people with big jaws and Gavrilo Princip, and people with who themselves are probably fairly inbred, yapping about inbreeding. I mean, the minute a Habsburg raises his head above the mud, he'll get kicked and stepped on. Why? Who would want that? Now, if it were offered, would they accept it? Yeah, I'm sure they would. But it's not going to be offered to them. Everybody has what they want. We have what we want, the best of all possible worlds, the slime buckets that own us now, the voice of the people. And we'll all go along doing what we're supposed to, and it's all wonderful. Vox populi, vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. And we were shown precisely what that meant during the COVID lockdown. Bark like dogs, little ones, bark. But thank God we don't have an evil monarchy. And thank God we're not ruled by terrible people like the Habsburgs. We're ruled by our kind of people. Slime buckets. I mean, that is fortunately it's true at all. So I, I wish I could tell you something better, but I would be the last person to suggest to a Habsburg or any other royal that they destroy themselves for the sake of people who don't even mind their babies being murdered and who are incapable of even reproducing a sustainable amount of a sustainable population. People who have tolerated the utter collapse of every kind of standard and principle. I mean, look at what we accept. Why should we have any better than what we've got? It'd be wonderful if one of those royals would draw their swords and lead who exactly? The people who have freed their countries from abortion and euthanasia and gay marriage? Those people? Oh yeah, them.
Well, maybe. So, is there a middle ground at all? So, not necessarily like in favor of a restoration of the monarchy. I remember when we were talking about the Windsors last year. The way you were talking, it seemed like you were saying that they are taught to sort of almost be nothing more than a museum piece,
Pretty
right?
much.
Right? Yeah, something like that, where like
Yeah.
they take nothing upon themselves in terms of helping people or helping their country at all.
Not if it steps in the way of the elected representatives of the people,
Okay.
consecrated by the holy rite of election, wherein the very best always rise to the top, like scum rising to the top of a pot of soup.
Okay. So I think I kind of got my answer there with your emotional reaction, where there kind of is no middle ground because the powers that be are so sensitive to that middle ground.
Precisely. They have no desire for any kind of rivalry, and as long as they keep their helots fed, drugged, and sexed up, we're fine.
Okay.
And it's the devil's deal, of course, and we'll all have to pay for it eventually. But at least we're free. Isn't that great? And it was Satan himself who says in Paradise Lost, better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. And that is the motto of every republic and of every democracy. You see, the funny thing about Paradise Lost is that it was actually, in some ways, a what's the word? I can't think of the word. Not a parody, but a representation, for want of a better word. I can't think of the word I want.
Satire?
Oh, no. It's not amusing. Tolkien hated them, which is why he didn't like Narnia.
Oh, it starts with an A.
Allegory.
Allegory.
Yes. In a lot of ways, Paradise Lost was an allegory of the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, with Satan as Cromwell, and or Cromwell as Satan, and Charles I as Christ. Milton was a Puritan, after all. And people often wonder, why is Satan a much more compelling figure? in Paradise Lost? Well, it's because he's Cromwell. That's why. And Milton liked Cromwell. He didn't like Charles I. Anyway, um, it was Saul Alinsky who said that Satan was the first radical. And it was Dr. Johnson who said that Satan was the first Whig. And I have to agree, although they were diametrically opposed to each other, I would have to agree with both Dr. Johnson and Saul Alinsky. I mean, we do not want to be ruled by decent people. I say we as the majority of folk, of course. We don't want that. We want what we have. And the proof of the pudding was brought home to me when the pro-abort California constitutional amendment passed so well, 65%.
It passed more than the people who voted for Newsom.
That's correct. So there was a good 4% who knew that Newsom was a schmuck, but nevertheless wanted to kill babies.
Yeah.
So okay, enjoy it. Eat it. Take it. Love it. Wrap yourself in it. Feel it. Be it. Do it. But if we're ever to deserve rulers like Blessed Karl of Austria, we have to improve ourselves. We have to become the sort of subjects that deserve those sorts of sovereigns. Or at least enough of us have to. There is a sense, in which truly, and I don't say this is an endorsement of democracy, but the reality is that every regime, in a sense, depends upon the tacit consent of the majority. Because if the majority weren't willing to go along with it, they wouldn't be able to manage. That's why the Soviet Union fell. It wasn't because suddenly everybody became a Democrat east of the Iron Curtain. It was because the thing could no longer sustain itself. It couldn't provide the bare minimum. And any regime, if they can provide the bare minimum, will get the grudging support of a majority. But if they can't, that's when they lose it. Otherwise, regime change comes through determined minorities doing what they want in the face of the majority. But anyhow, that's my answer. And as I say, I am in no sense a spokesman for any of the Habsburgs or the Bourbon or the Windsors or any royals whatsoever, which shows you, even in exile or out of power, they're still a lot smarter than they might be.
I don't know. That'd be kind of cool. You should send in a job application for that. That would be cool. I could see.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, that'd be fun. You'd enjoy that too.
I would, and the whole thing would last for about 3 seconds. Yeah. So what does His Majesty think of his new Prime Minister? Well, he thinks it's frankly amazing that his subjects have set yet another moron up to be Prime Minister. But if a total loser is what they want, more power to him, His Majesty says. Total loser will be their Prime Minister for the next term.
Okay.
I don't think that would go over well.
All right.
I really don't. So what does His Majesty think about the government's latest measures? He thinks they've taken leave of their senses and wonders that they're even capable of involuntary processes within their own bodies. He's amazed that people this stupid are actually able to form words with their mouths.
That reminds me of the last time you're on television. The
Yeah. That was great, Mr. Coulombe. You ain't never gonna be out here no more, but that was great. He was right too. He wasn't lying. He knew what he was talking about.
Oh man, we alluded to I think Charles talked about this in a previous episode, but I think I was in a question on John Paul II, and yeah, Charles really gave a non politically correct answer, and it was the truth, but he basically
Not something they want
self-immolated.
here. And
Yeah.
it was a live feed, so they couldn't even edit it. It just went out over the airwaves. I felt very happy about that. But
And
see again, I mean, I would hardly be serving my royal master if I had one
yeah,
by self-immolating on his behalf.
yeah. The person who said that to
That
Charles
would
was the honest black cameraman afterwards. Just
yeah. Man, Mr. Coulombe, that was just great. That was it was great. You ain't never gonna work here no more, but that was great. And he was right. He was absolutely right. Because he'd worked with me all through the different the different things, so we got to know each other fairly well. And he was a great guy. He was
yeah.
really a great guy. You know, but I mean, in a society based upon lies, in the immortal words of George Orwell, the truth becomes a subversive act,
Yeah.
and it upsets those who rule the show. Oh, so horrible. I really no. I mean, I look at just this. I just did a podcast for the Papal Zouave International man, Brendan Castle or Cassell, whoever his name. Very nice fellow. But I pointed out that the last king of the two Sicilies, Francesco II, is now a servant of God. His mother was beatified. Louis XVI's sister who was murdered, of course, in the Revolution, is now a servant of God. Mary, Queen of Scots, James II. I mean, all these examples of royal sanctity, and we still don't get it.
Yeah.
We look at the ones like Henry VIII, who were real exceptions, and try to pretend that they were the usual pattern. Compare Henry VIII to what we all accept now, to the amount of power we give our masters now. And then tell me who of our current masters is remotely a saint? Joe Biden? Vladimir Putin? Zelensky? Macron? Schultz? I mean, they're very inferior people.
Didn't you like the
So,
Hungarian guy?
Orban, yeah, I like him. But of course, nobody else does. Oh, and now the EU, they're going to be they're going to have the EU presidency shortly, and the European Commission is saying they're going to ignore them. You know, Orban is probably too nice a fellow to do it, but if I were in his shoes, oh, you're going to ignore me, are you? We're going to fix that, I think. And any possible way I could screw up the works, I would. But decent people are usually too nice to do what their opponents do.
All
That
right.
is an unfortunate reality that cannot be escaped.
All right, you're on a roll. Any other things? I mean, we're out of questions, Charles. We're at the end of the episode. Where do we go from
Well,
here?
where do we go from here? Well, it's mid-January. By the time people see this, it'll be January 15th. Uh, 10 days, well, on the 21st speaking of Louis XVI, is the anniversary of Louis XVI's murder. So if you live in France or other places, you can think about a requiem for Louis XVI on January 21st. January 25th is the birthday of Robert Burns. And so Scots people all over the world will be having their Burns suppers starting in mid-January. A lot of fun if you can go to those. The 28th is the Feast of Blessed Charlemagne. And then the 30th, January 30th, is it's the day when Charles I was murdered by Cromwell and the scumbags there. It's also the death days of Dame Guéranger, Dame Colombe Marmion. So there's a lot.
Yeah, and January 15th, happy Martin Luther King Day when this will air. All you people in America.
Right. Thanks for reminding me. January 9th is Robert E. Lee's birthday.
That's past. That's old news, Charles. That's
January 19th is not past.
Oh, I thought you said 9th.
No, 19th.
Okay.
Is Robert E. Lee's birthday. What?
All right, great. Beautiful. All right, that's it. Yep, what?
No.
What?
February is coming, and you know what that means.
Mardi Gras, Valentine's Day, Groundhog's Day.
Candlemas, indeed. Washington's birthday, Lincoln's birthday.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are you getting into the mood?
No, because you're getting ahead of yourself. We have my life. I take it one day at a time.
How about wearing a periwig for George Washington and a top hat for Honest Abe?
That'd be cool.
Would that be all right?
Yeah. All right. We're out of time. If it's Monday,
it's off the menu.
What about the soul you save?
It may very well be your own.
See ya, everyone.
God bless you all. See you next week.